The real story of Blackbird is so ridiculously crazy that many people have not even considered the fact it is based on a real life story. So insane is the story that Bill Burr covered it on his podcast, talking about the unbelievable efforts made to take down a vicious, depraved serial killer.
One of the sickest stories ever, and we're like, dude, this has to be a fucking movie. And of course, in the end, they said that they were going to turn it into a movie. It was this fucking show about serial killers, and the whole time they're talking about this drug dealer kid, and we're like, how the fuck does this? And they keep showing this serial killer guy. It's like and they're showing the drug dealer older. You know, just the way they put it together, it was riveting.
In 1993, a 19-year-old Christian college student in Indiana named Trisha Lynn Reitler disappeared after going for a walk. The disappearance caught national attention when her mother even appeared on the Jerry Springer show to appeal for information.
Hang in there and know that we love you, and we're doing everything we can to find you.
Other similar-aged females would report a van following them around the outskirts of the same shopping centre Trisha had gone missing from. The man driving the van could not be more conspicuous. He had a mutton chop sideburns and he did nothing to hide his presence. That odd-looking psychopathic killer would be known as Larry Hall. In September of that year, another girl would go missing. This time, a 15-year-old named Jessica Roach from Georgetown, Illinois. This meant that the killer was not only a serial killer hunting women, but a barbaric monster who also targeted children. Her body was found only weeks later in a cornfield in Indiana. It took over a year of investigation for any clues to be discovered about the perpetrator. The van of Larry Hall was spotted in the area on the day Jessica vanished. Hall had become known to police as he had scared several girls across numerous local towns by stopping them and asking them bizarre questions. Some of them even ran from him before reporting him to the police. Investigating officer Gary Miller took him into questioning. When he showed him a picture of Jessica, he visibly flinched. Larry was in fact an identical twin. However, despite being identical, the brothers were extremely different temperamentally. This may be because Larry was oxygen starved during his birth, which may have contributed to his low IQ of below 85. They were born in 1962 and they both grew up in a poor, dysfunctional household. Their mother was domineering whilst their father drank heavily whilst holding down a job at a cemetery. Larry and Gary both helped their father Robert dig graves when they were children. Clearly, the exposure to death and the realisation of mortality had an effect on Larry. However, his brother did not seem to be affected in the same way. Larry seemed to struggle socially at school, whilst his more dominant brother seemed to curate a healthy social life. Larry and his brother got introduced to guns from a young age as Civil War reenactors. This is in fact why Larry was inspired to grow out the outdated mutton chop look. This allowed the socially awkward future killer to make friends. However, like modern day incels, he could not befriend, let alone bed any females, so a depraved obsession grew in his mind. Meanwhile, Jimmy Keene, the exact opposite, was living his best life in Illinois. Jimmy Keene was a local celebrity as a former high school football star. His nickname on the field was the Assassin because he took someone out of the game in every match he played. And he was every bit as formidable off-field. He was a highly trained martial artist, which gave fighting prowess to his muscular frame. He was the typical jock stud as portrayed in many high school movies. The most popular guy in school, with women coming out of his ears. To be able to afford a lavish playboy lifestyle, he also began dealing drugs. By the time he was 20, he was already a millionaire. He was making $1 million each year from dealing. He even owned a 6,000 square foot home and would have crazy parties costing over 30 grand a time. However, after 15 years of making serious money and shifting serious gear, his house was raided by police. And because Jimmy refused to rat out his suppliers, he was handed the maximum sentence of 10 years behind bars. In 1994, Larry Hall made a confession about the disappearance of Jessica Roach. He stated that he kidnapped her, tied her up, and forced himself on her. He said while he was doing it, he put her against a tree, strangling her to death from behind so that he did not have to watch her die. He also hinted that he had killed multiple girls. He said all of the girls looked alike. He couldn't remember all of them. He also admitted to forcing himself on and murdering Trisha Lynn Reitler. However, the suspected serial killer recounted his story the following day. He said the story he told was only what he had dreamt. However, police still had witnesses in the area claiming he had stopped and spoke to girls in his van on those days. Furthermore, when they investigated his home, they found notes that seemed to allude to him planning to kidnap and scouting potential kidnap sites. For example, he would write about parks and colleges where he had seen girls walking around alone. He also made suspicious lists of things he needed from the hardware store. For example, plastic tarp, presumably used to move bodies and stop blood from leaking onto his van. He also left instructions for himself, which appeared to be him trying to make himself more forensically untraceable. For example, the words, "buy condoms, buy 2 more leather belts, cut out stained carpet, buy new hacksaw blades, clean all tools," were all listed. He also had newspaper clippings of Roach and Reitler, along with possessions of other missing girls and pornographic images that he had drawn on to make the adult models look like murder victims. He said all the evidence in his possession was deliberately put there by himself to make him look like the killer, even though he wasn't. He said he was only doing it for attention. The police, of course, knew Larry was the real killer and possibly could help solve other missing disappearances. So they opted for an action film-like solution to the problem. In 1998, Jimmy Keene was offered a chance to turn his life around and get out of prison early by prosecutor Larry Beaumont. All he had to do was transfer from his low security prison to a maximum security prison for the criminally insane, filled with murderers and rapists. Then he would have to befriend the callous serial killer Larry Hall, use his natural charisma and toughness to gain his trust and respect, and get him to confess to his crimes. This seemed like an impossible ask, but Jimmy risked his life and went for it anyway. Keene wanted to do something honourable in helping to catch a serial killer and find the bodies. However, he had further motivation to do it. His father was ill after having a stroke, and it seemed he may not last 10 more years. Keene wanted to make it home to his father before he passed away. When he arrived, special investigators had advised him not to approach Hall for at least 6 months, as he was known to be very paranoid and skeptical about new people. But within hours, Jimmy made his first move. He accidentally, on purpose, bumped into him and asked him where the library was. Then, as they were neighbouring cellmates, Jimmy put the charms on him and they were soon eating breakfast together. During this time, he was also warned by former mob boss Vincent the Chin Gigante, who was also incarcerated, not to hang around with Hall because he was a baby killer. He was advised that if he continued to do so, he might end up dead. Jimmy also used a calculated measure of violence to stand himself out as the big man on campus. Whilst many people were sitting in the TV room watching America's Most Wanted, a huge inmate, without asking, stood up and turned the channel. Larry Hall quietly mentioned to Jimmy that he was watching that show. So, in an act of loyalty and dominance, Jimmy stood up and turned the channel back. After an argument broke out, he sparked the guy clean out, sending him to hospital. Jimmy was then thrown in the hole. However, this calculated risk meant Hall's respect and trust of Jimmy Keene was unquestionable. Soon after leaving the hole, Hall would tell Jimmy all about Trisha Reitler's murder. He said he buried her in the woods near West Slocum. However, he could not find out the exact location. Later, he found Hall in the prison workshop, gazing deeply at a map. It seemed that the map had been marked with red dots and carved wooden falcons. Hall even commented that the falcons watch over the dead. But this is where Jimmy Keene messed up. He, thinking he had found the location of the body of Trisha Reitler, thought he would tell Hall how he truly felt. He told him that night he was a disgusting sicko and one of the most despicable forms of human life on the planet. Instantly, Hall knew Jimmy was an informant and told him so. However, despite finding a map, Jimmy Keene had jumped the gun. He was not able to give the exact location of the body and it was never found. This was partly because the map was not able to be recovered in time because the FBI hotline that was looking after him did not receive his voicemail message, and the chief psychologist that was in on the investigation was on holiday. This meant Hall was able to destroy the map. To be released, it was a specific requirement that he had to find the location of the body. But it was deemed Jimmy had provided valuable evidence about several disappearances. In order to prove he wasn't making it up to save his own skin, he was made to take a polygraph test, which he passed. So it was decided that Jimmy Keene was a valuable help to the investigation and was set free. Luckily, he was able to spend his father's final 5 years on Earth as a free man beside him. Incredibly, after police had given up hope of finding the body of Trisha Reitler, it was Jimmy Keene's crazy story that again reopened the investigation. Both a book written by himself and Hillel Levin and a Playboy article re-sparked interest in the case. It even inspired Larry's twin brother Gary to stop defending his brother. Gary began to call his own brother a baby killer.
Larry, just like Jimmy Keene calls him, and he's a baby killer.
Gary then was sent to prison to try and get Larry to confess. He admitted to 15 murders on tape recording, but again retracted. For a long time, he was only charged with the abduction of Jessica Roach. However, investigators believe he killed around 30 to 50 or more women and girls. He is suspected of being one of the most prolific serial killers in US history. Despite everyone knowing Larry is a serial killer, With countless retracted confessions, he can never be officially called a serial killer, as it was never proven. And even though he had a very low IQ, Hall was highly adept at getting rid of evidence. Even still, Larry Hall will never be released again. At 59, he is serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole.